war. We have no choice. We have no choice. Build that wall. 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 Build that wall.
Immigrants. A word that's too often followed by
criminals, illegal immigrant criminals. They've got to respect American law.
They do not pay taxes.
And they're taking your jobs.
perceptions or facts. Let's take a look at what the numbers tell us. First assertion. Immigrants increase the crime rate. Sure, an estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants are in violation of American immigration policies. But overall, FBI data shows that over a span of 20 years, crime has dropped. Violent crime in particular has almost halved. All while the undocumented immigrant population tripled. Last year, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement removed 139,368 undocumented immigrants that were previously convicted of a crime. Then there's the view that undocumented immigrants are taking jobs from Americans. It's argued they're willing to accept lower wages and poor working conditions. But the data shows it may be more about skills. It's estimated that 8.1 million undocumented immigrants are working or looking for work, which is about 5.1% of the nation's labor force. Yet, in specific jobs like farming, cleaning and maintenance, and construction, undocumented workers make up much larger percentages of each sector. And they're more likely to do those jobs because they don't necessarily require fluency in English or a high school or college diploma. Because 47% of undocumented immigrants have less than a high school education, while only 8% of U.S.-born residents have not graduated from high school. That's why native-born, low-skilled workers are likely to be cashiers, truck drivers, and waiters. So what about the claim that undocumented immigrants aren't paying any taxes? Well, they actually pay more than $11 billion each year in sales, property, and income taxes. Wait, income tax? That's right. Many undocumented immigrants have ITIN numbers and feed into the tax system that way. And if the U.S. legalized all those immigrant statuses, the additional taxes they would pay would be an estimated $2 billion for roads, schools, and services. That's more than some tax-avoiding Americans, right?
Look, all online people right now, listen to me, okay? The daycare at our local mosque burnt down this week. The news got footage of it just like they would of any other fire.
Now more than a dozen preschool children narrowly escaped a fire today at one of Tampa Bay's largest mosques.
It's amazing that no one was hurt in this fire.
They posted it online, and people obviously commented what they thought. We're going to read those comments right now. And he sent a helicopter out, and they got video of it, and they posted it on Facebook, and they said, Islamic Center on fire. I want you to read the comments and react to them.
Show them the comments.
We gotta be serious, like.
Are you guys gonna have the comments so that people can see them?
Burn them all down and deport them all?
Like, I was born here. Where am I gonna get deported to? The hospital?
Do they know it's a building of like a daycare, like kids?
I would get deported to New York.
I'm an American citizen. I don't know where would I be deported? That's the only thing.
Let it burn. Bob Shepard, thank you. Bob Shepard. What is this guy wearing? Do you see that? Do you see what he's wearing?
This guy's a firefighter.
That's messed up. He was probably there.
Let the note.
Bob was there and he's bagging on.
Thanks, Bob.
This is a firefighter.
Your only job is to stop fires. And he wants it to burn. Come on. Thanks, Bob.
See, there is some good news on TV.
Wow, that's good. The world's just one happy place.
Please zoom on this guy.
We gotta get a little box right here.
Put on
his face.
What is going on?
It's probably an old profile, dude.
It's been 60 years.
That's probably his prime. That's his prime.
That's his prom. And he doesn't even have a
job.
job.
That's his prime, not his prom.
Full of muzzies.
What is a muzzy?
Is it full of muzzies?
Is it full of muzzies? Is that like, I'm trying to like.
I've never even heard of that term, muzzies. Isn't it like a furry character? Muzzies. I'm gonna start calling us muzzies. Is that okay? I see no problem here. Let it burn.
Isn't that a song?
Did they want people to be burned?
Are you just now realizing that?
Yeah. That's not
Is she
nice.
real?
Like they're taking it from a song, like let it be. Like,
That's Frozen. That's Let It Go.
No, like let it be.
Hey, what's that song? Let It Burn.
Let it burn?
No, that's
Is
Frozen.
that Let It Go?
Let it burn.
Let it burn, let it burn. Time to show the world my turn. I won't care how they're going to scream.
White nationalists and counter-protesters blamed each other for the violence that erupted in Charlottesville on Saturday. Protesters also blamed the police for not keeping the peace. Amateur video from many angles over the course of the day paints a picture of how events turned violent. Early Saturday morning, white supremacists gathered at McIntyre Park in Charlottesville. Around the same time, counter-protesters met at a church 2.5 miles away. Both groups marched toward Emancipation Park in downtown Charlottesville, the site of the planned far-right rally. Several men wearing National Guard-style military gear were present. The first outbreak of violence was reported at 10:30 a.m. More clashes happened before 11 a.m. The use of pepper spray was reported. A state of emergency was declared at 11:06 a.m. Violence continued until 11:30 a.m., when officials declared unlawful assembly. Police started making arrests around 11:55 a.m. as they began clearing Emancipation Park. At 12:30 p.m., clashes were reported at nearby Justice Park. Counter-protesters marched down 4th Street. At 1:40 p.m., a car sped down 4th Street. Then it rushed in reverse.
Did you guys just see that? A car just plowed through hundreds of people downtown Charlottesville. Holy we need the ambulances.
James Alex Fields Jr. was arrested and charged with second-degree murder after authorities identified him as the driver of the car. Heather Hayer, a Charlottesville paralegal, died in the attack.
There's a chart I saw recently that I can't get out of my head. A Harvard business professor and economist asked more than 5,000 Americans how they thought wealth was distributed in the United States. This is what they said they thought it was. Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 3 20% groups, they asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them what they thought was the ideal distribution. And 92%, that's at least 9 out of 10 of them, said it should be more like this. In other words, more equitable than they think it is. Now that fact is telling, admittedly, the notion that most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting to me is the reality compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution. Shockingly skewed. Not only do the bottom 20% and the next 20%, the bottom 40% of Americans barely have any of the wealth. I mean, it's hard to even see them on the chart. But the top 1% has more of the country's wealth than 9 out of 10 Americans believe the entire top 20% should have. Mind-blowing.
Low-income Americans are 3 times more likely to die before the age of 65 than high-income Americans.
My earliest work started out looking at inequalities in health in terms of socioeconomic inequalities in health. Why does health vary by income and education and occupational status? And many people don't realize this, but the gaps in health in the United States by income and education are larger than the gaps in health by race. It's an interesting sociological question why, as a society, we've historically paid complete attention just to racial gaps in health and not to the gaps by socioeconomic status. Let me give you a concrete example. Where you live in the United States, for most people, determines where you go to school, the quality of elementary and high school education. And the quality of education then determines your access to quality higher education, which determines your access to quality jobs, which determines your access to residence in quality neighborhoods, which determines the quality of resources you have in life to deal with all the things you will encounter. In some states, there's a 13-year difference in how long people live, just linked to which county they live in. All of these are powerful ways in which our health is affected that is shaped by the context in which we live.
We know a lot about how education, income, wealth, all these resources contribute to social inequality. But we also all exist in social networks, and those networks are not random. In other words, people in our network tend to resemble us, and this has implications for social inequality. So usually when we look at the social networks in the United States, we see that there's a lot of homophily. In other words, similar people tend to be friends with similar others. So you tend to be friends with who are of similar status in terms of income, in terms of education, sometimes race, and gender as well. So studies show that a lot of the social behaviors are actually affected by the prevalence of those behaviors among our peers. So we're more likely to smoke if a lot of our friends smoke. We're actually more likely to quit if many of our friends decide to quit. So social networks can both be beneficial, and they can also hurt us and force us into detrimental behavior. So when we think about disadvantaged groups in our society, who have less education, less income, less opportunities, their networks are also characterized by these very same characteristics. In other words, their networks do not help them in getting opportunities. So one example is advanced placement courses in high schools. Now, we know that if you take these courses, you're more likely to get into selective colleges, so they're beneficial to you. But they're also costly because you have to invest time and effort. If you have a lot of people around you who take these courses, it will be more enjoyable to study together and you can learn from each other. So the costs of taking the course are lower and the benefits are probably higher because you can learn from each other. But now, if we look at actual high school networks, there's a lot of segregation by academic status. So if you're a top-tier kid in real-life networks, you actually tend to have other top-tier kids. In this case, you'll definitely benefit because a lot of your friends will be taking these courses. But now imagine you're a bottom-tier kid. You don't have any access, any social access to friends who are academically high achievers. In this case, you won't get any benefits. So we see, because of these differences in the characteristics of social networks, we see existing inequalities getting larger and larger and become enduring over time. So any policy intervention here should consider the social structure and the characteristics of social networks. The broader, the more diverse we can make people's social networks, the more they can benefit from the positive effects of networks.
The scarlet letter is theirs. It is not ours. We are pure, we are strong, we are brave, and we will fight.
A defiant Rose McGowan rallying women in Detroit, speaking publicly for the first time since the Harvey Weinstein scandal made headlines.
I have been silenced for 20 years.
The actress, who says Weinstein raped her, never mentioned him by name.
The triggering has been insane. The monster's face everywhere, my nightmare.
Weinstein denies any non-consensual sex. The New York Times reports he reached a $100,000 settlement with the actress after a 1997 incident. The hashtag #MeToo getting another story, this time from California Congresswoman Jackie Speer, about her time as an aide on Capitol Hill.
The chief of staff held my face, kissed me, and stuck his tongue in my mouth. So I know what it's like to keep these things hidden deep down inside.
At the Women's Convention in Detroit, cheers for the silence being broken.
You wonder, what will it take for men in power to take this seriously, to remember it's your mother, it's your daughter, it's your sister. Enough is enough.
A message corporate America seems to be getting. Powerful men across the spectrum resigning or being fired or suspended after accusations of harassment, including celebrity chef John Besh leaving his restaurant group. NBC News political analyst Mark Halperin off the air accused of lewd conduct when he worked for ABC News. And this morning, more questions about the public behavior of former President George H.W. Bush. A fourth woman says he groped her during a 2006 photo shoot. Embarrassment and worse as more and more women speak up to demand change.
You attack her, you attack all of us.
First marchers began arriving near the Capitol building before dawn. There were women and men of all ages from all over the country, a mix of ethnic, religious, and class backgrounds. Among the many first-time demonstrators was Janet Chen, who brought her 8-year-old daughter, Molly. They're worried about the Republican rollback of the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare.
I have a heart defect, and I want to get health insurance when I'm older, but I might not be able to.
I think it's important that the next generation of little girls stand up for women's rights and realize that there's a real threat to women's rights in this country right now with the incoming administration.
Debbie Snowden came from North Carolina to support abortion rights and funding for Planned Parenthood.
It's really important to me that they're going to probably reverse Roe v. Wade, take away abortion rights in this country. I'm very concerned. I'm at an age where I can remember us fighting for those rights, and it's really hard to believe we're in danger of losing them.
While the overriding message we heard from people here was anti-Trump, the issues motivating marchers were as diverse as the crowds here.
Anjum Khan from Maryland says she's concerned about Muslim rights and Trump's promise to ban Muslims from entering the country.
When he said he's going to eradicate Islamic terrorism, that's wonderful. Like, yes, please do that. But in doing that, don't trample on my rights.
Rohima Maya has marched on Washington before for civil rights and was among the protesters at the inauguration yesterday.
As a black woman with a 30-year-old black son that lives in New York City, it should be an issue for all people that our children are safe.
Judy Ames, a gay rights activist since the AIDS epidemic started in the 1980s, was here with a group of gay musicians.
But we just don't think that women's rights and civil rights and everybody's rights should be just trampled on and thrown away. It's ridiculous.
The march's wide-ranging policy platform advocated for economic justice for women, keeping abortion access safe and legal, immigration reform, police accountability, union rights, sex worker rights, and environmental protection.
Women matter. And we will not be shy about standing up to what matters to us. And here's what matters to me. That my daughter inherits a world where a healthy environment is a basic right for all of us.
March leaders like actress America Ferrera, whose parents are from Honduras, said their rights are under attack.
We are America. And we are here to stay. We will not go from being a nation of immigrants to a nation of ignorance.
You look great.
Longtime political activist Gloria Steinem called on the crowd to use their people power to keep a close eye on the new president.
Trump and his handlers have found a fox for every chicken coop in Washington, and a Twitter finger must not become a trigger finger.
Kristen Rowe Finkbeiner, the head of the group Moms Rising, called for equal pay for equal work.
Women make 80 cents to a man's dollar. Moms earn only 71 cents to a man's dollar, and moms of color earn as low as 46 cents to a man's dollar.
And activist filmmaker Michael Moore had this word of advice to the assembled women.
You have to run for office. You, yes, you.
Even if you're not sitting in the White House, even if you are not a member of the United States Congress, even if you don't run a big corporate super PAC, you have the power. And we, the people, have the power.
After the speeches, the protesters intended to march about 2.5 miles from near the Capitol, along the National Mall, to the White House, but they were unable to do that due to the size of their crowd. The same thing happened in Chicago, where 150,000 people turned up for a rally in Chicago's Grant Park, so many more than expected. In New York, some 200,000 people rallied outside the United Nations before marching through Manhattan in support of human and civil rights. In Los Angeles, tens of thousands of demonstrators converged on downtown's Pershing Square. Overseas, thousands of Trump protesters took to the streets of London. In Paris, thousands marched near the Eiffel Tower carrying signs, "We have our eyes on you, Mr. Trump." Among the thousands of Trump protesters in Sydney, Australia, one woman said, "We want to send the sign to the women in the US that we are all in this together."